Welcome to Red Light, Green Light, the podcast where you'll hear from industry leaders in science, technology, and innovation about the power of strategic storytelling. With decades of experience, our guests will share their own insights and real-world stories to help you avoid red light barriers and ignite green light solutions. From the Zoom room to the boardroom. In each episode, we'll corkscrew downward into the guests' personal experiences of challenge and success, highlighting strategies that turn complex ideas into clear, compelling storylines for stakeholders. Here is where expert minds share stories that shape the future. What's more, you'll walk away with tips to try immediately to drive the vision of innovation with your team. Hi, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Red Light, Green Light. I am your host, Cindy Skalicky, and I'm so thrilled to have a very special guest with me today. I want to introduce him in just a moment, but to refresh our memories on what we do on this podcast, we are bringing everyone here every week, a seasoned, savvy specialist who can tell their stories. Sometimes they're science stories, and sometimes they're just in the realm of innovation. But we're here to help our listeners advance their knowledge in the space and maybe skip some of the pitfalls that our guests are going to talk to us about that they might have made and accelerate your growth to success. So, Mike Freeman, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Cindy. Thanks for having me today.
Yes, absolutely. Mike is the CEO of Innosphere Ventures and the CEO of the Colorado-Wyoming NSF engine. He is right here in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live, and we are just we're a little more than a good golf shot away from each other, but in terms of our offices, we actually live quite close together as well. But it's been a really wonderful journey, Mike, watching you for the last, 9 or 10 years that I've known you, to see what's happening at Innosphere Ventures and to talk about today. We'll start at the beginning of your career path, if you are okay with that, and we'll just keep going. And let's just kick it off. Tell us a little about Mike Freeman before the CEOs and the monikers you have currently. Where'd you grow up, and how'd you get into the roles that you're in now?
Yeah, again, thanks for having me today, Cindy. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in North Carolina and Washington, D.C., on and off, and got into public service early in my career. I love finance and management and organization, but I really wasn't motivated by business necessarily in the early days. So I got a degree in economics and English undergrad, and then a master's degree in public administration, which is kind of the equivalent degree you get to go into city management or county management.
Right, which you did, right?
The first part of my career doing that kind of work. And really loved finance and economic development, and that kind of set the stage for the trajectory I've been on really since the 90s.
Yep. Tell us a little about what you, like maybe one of the first times you really saw the impact of working in the city management and the sort of scope and in terms of how that was assisting the constituents and some of the stakeholders. Is there a certain project that really kind of lit your fire when you were early in your career?
Yeah, maybe not a certain project, but what I was experiencing in the 90s was that we're very early in the world, really in sort of this technology revolution that we've seen the last couple of decades, especially. Sure. And what I was observing was that economic development professionals, let's say, at the local level, really didn't get what was going on in tech. And there really wasn't a game plan for cities and counties to think about growing a technology ecosystem in their own community, meaning economic development. And so therefore, what did we do in that era? We built water lines and wastewater lines and highway interchanges, and we chased relocation opportunities. That was by and large what we did.
Okay.
And So the light bulb really went off for me in Southern Oregon when I took a city management role in Ashland, Oregon, and started interfacing with entrepreneurs mainly from the Bay Area that
Hmm.
had built technology companies and sold them or exited. So the term would
Okay.
be. And I was really fascinated with these people. How did, what was their technical background? What was the product and company they built? How did you sell your company? And then how do you attract these types of people into your community from
Mm.
an economic perspective? And so that was around the year 2000.
Okay. Okay. And Mike, what did you find out about what you're now so focused and passionate about bringing entrepreneurs into the community and into the county. What were you seeing then, in that experience in Oregon where you're like, oh my gosh, these people they're coming up with these great ideas, they're implementing them, they're making our region, our city, our county better, and then they're exiting this. We need more of these people. Is that kind of where your thought was in terms of, attracting them?
I got there eventually, Cindy, but I'll
Okay.
tell you where we started was how was the city government set up to frankly deal with these types of businesses?
Yeah.
And they were largely unknown. I mean, they
Okay.
were doing things that in local government we didn't understand. Very
Okay.
early internet applications, technologies around telecommunications, all is relatively new. And so the first step was really more trying to figure out what are these folks working on, and then in their business,
Mm-hmm.
what were gap areas,
Mm-hmm.
and then what of those things, what could a city government frankly do?
Okay.
So in
Got it.
Oregon, one of the things that was interesting, being Ashland being kind of equal distant, the Bay Area to
Mm-hmm.
Portland, not exactly, but close,
Mm-hmm.
is that, and a small community, um, communities like Ashland in the early 2000s were not going to get advanced broadband service anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Too far from that, too far from the literal infrastructure
Right.
of the internet as it was emerging. And so that caused the city leaders before I arrived there to conceptualize leveraging the public power utility that the city owned to get into telecommunications and
Okay.
broadband. And
Okay.
so that was a specific thing. Once I got there, I said, hey, this is really an economic development project. It's not about cheap cable TV. We need
Right.
to get high speed internet
Right.
to the local university, to the school district facilities, to the
Mm-hmm.
city, and then most importantly, the entrepreneurs that were going to build on
Mm-hmm.
these advanced networks over time.
Okay.
And so it was a little bit infrastructure, a little bit of program, and then trying to find that unique thing that a city government can do. But that also quickly caused me to realize that in economic development at the local level, we weren't set up to deal with entrepreneurs
Mm-hmm.
that were tech focused. Now that's
Mm-hmm.
not certainly universally across the country, but I'd say by and large. And so I left city government and did management consulting for a little under a decade,
Okay.
mainly working with economic development corporations, cities and counties, trying to tackle this idea in our community. How do we build up this technology
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem that creates these really high paying jobs, spin off jobs, secondary jobs, um, and then creates a real differentiation for our community.
I
And
love that.
so yeah,
Okay.
did that for quite a bit of time.
Nice. All right. I'm going to press your memory for a second, Mike. Back to that conversation where you were in Oregon and you were presenting this idea about, we need broadband here now. It's not
Mhm.
cable TV, it's connectivity and it's advancement and it's entrepreneurship. We're all about messaging over here at On Point and getting audiences of stakeholders from the red light of risk to the green light of go. Do you have any memories about those conversations? And was it an easy sell to kind of get them over the hump and say yes to that?
It was not an easy sell.
Okay.
So you can imagine not many governments in the United States have pursued advanced telecommunication projects at that point in time. Now, there have been a handful. The common denominator was they were all city governments that
Mm-hmm.
have power utilities or called public power.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is in the power industry, you need fiber optic
Mm-hmm.
networks to control and assets and run these networks. And so the idea was, why don't we basically overbuild the fiber and then offer, advanced telecommunication services. Again, that was very, very new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and frankly, why it was not an easy sell: cost.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Yep.
brand new. I mean, this is taxpayers taking this on through the utility, one.
Yep.
Two, there weren't many referenceable utilities that had done this. So
Right.
not a lot of, hey, they do this and X outcome
Right.
would happen.
Right.
And then I think that probably the biggest thing to your question was, before I arrived in the community, it had really been pitched as not really an economic development
Oh,
initiative. And
okay.
so that was, I think, the important spin. I'll use that in a positive way.
Yeah, the
That we
framing
had to
was
think
not.
about, hey, it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
50% off your cable TV price. That's, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
your bill. It was
Mm-hmm.
really the telecommunications part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and the capacity you build at the school district, the
Mm-hmm.
hospital, the university, the government, the entrepreneurial community. That was the value. Now you
Okay.
happen to get cable TV as well. That's
Sure.
fine.
That was a bonus. Right.
Yep.
So can you point to anything, Mike, when you look back at that experience? What ended up kind of working to get to get them to that yes? What was, when you look back, what persuaded them?
Well, I think it was really this idea that it fundamentally was a building block for the economy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was pivotal. And then, very critically important, there was a business model. So in other words, you
Okay.
spent millions of dollars building a telecommunications infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
that there would be enough broadband customers and cable TV customers to make it work. I mean, that was a critical part of it. I would say that was pretty widely understood,
Mm-hmm.
because there have been enough communities that have done that kind of thing to say, here's your typical uptake, for cable TV and internet. And here in Fort Collins and Longmont, Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
many Colorado communities have gone through this, but it's decades later.
Right.
This
Right.
was very, very early on.
Very early.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at it, it's and you pretend, if I'm imagining I'm one of those people in the audience listening to this argument, you don't have anything to fall back on as previous proof. It's very expensive. So, your role, and I'm thinking of our audience members listening, when you have a situation like that, it's time to sell the vision of the future that the person can buy into and help them see it. And then you have a job then
Yeah.
of painting out how you can be a pioneer in this space by doing this and be the first to market, the first success story. And then that can get people excited. So that's just an interesting use case to noodle with in terms of persuasiveness and, which levers are we going to be able to pull to get this audience
Mhm.
toward go and to get what we want, and how can we help them see that as clearly and as quickly as we possibly can. So love that. Well, let's turn a little bit toward the work that you're doing now, Mike. And I'm glad you shared that storyline about your early career of getting the technology in order and some of your experiences there, because it seems to me there's, the 2.0 of those experiences, maybe the 3.0, is what you've been working on building at Innosphere to help, to do it even better this time around in Fort Collins with these communities and entrepreneurs here. Would that be a fair assessment? It was like, okay, I saw what I saw. I liked that idea. Let's do it here and even better.
Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time trying to imagine how you scale all this up.
Right.
I mean, kind of looking at, not that it was low level activity, but starting in Ashland, it's a relatively small community. It's 25,000. I was there, a certain density of entrepreneurs, and so that's really what I've been trying to think through, and then really build into the Innosphere organization is, how do you scale all this up and
Right.
create larger
Right.
impact? And so, I mean, I think a good reference point, when I joined the Innosphere board many years ago, at that point in time, the organization was supporting about 5 to 7 startups a year,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
exclusively in Northern Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And last year, including the real estate we now own, we supported 88 companies.
That's amazing.
And about, between all the businesses, they employ about 600, highly paid technical workers and business workers.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
going
10x,
from
right, of the
five to,
companies.
yeah,
Yeah,
something. And
yeah,
so I think that's great that you know, I think the organization's been able to grow in the last decade in particular, but we're really thinking about the next decade now. I mean, that
right.
never, you know, that's great, that's past,
Yep,
and where do we go from here? And
yep,
so continuing to think about scaling up the impact is absolutely what we do every day here.
yep,
Is that's the
absolutely.
objective.
Yes. Well, my first experience at, I'm going to hit on something that might feel really small in the scope of things, but it'll get us to kind of Innosphere and what your mission is there and such. But, I have a special place in my heart for the Innosphere team and building because of my first experience there when I was first starting out my entrepreneurial journey 10 years ago. And this might not even seem like a big thing, Mike, but I met you because of the meetings that are held inside of Innosphere that are SAGE, right? The Senior Advisory Group of Entrepreneurs is what SAGE stands for. And that is a totally volunteer organization is even a heavy word for it. There's no money that changes hands. It's 100% volunteer.
Mhm.
But entrepreneurs come in, early stage entrepreneurs, and they pitch to a room filled with really savvy, skilled business folks who come in and want to volunteer their time to help that entrepreneur. So just by virtue of you agreeing to host that in the building of Innosphere every single month on Wednesday mornings, that's kind of how I ended up meeting you and the whole crew. And it's also the birthplace of our how-to model. The Innosphere building is where I built the how-to model from its infancy and grew it and was able to use Innosphere and Sage specifically. It was my beta test. It was my messaging lab. And I almost didn't even realize that that's what was happening
Mhm.
while it was happening. But now that I look back, it's just really cool. And so just want to thank you for being such a generous leader who agrees to just bring people in. That was such a neat experience for me. And it's been a pleasure to work with you using the model now and so many of the entrepreneurs that have come our way through the work you and I have done together and the teams. So just want to point that out for our audience that this is a special edition in a number of ways for me. So Mike, tell us about Innosphere Ventures. Some people listening aren't from here, don't understand kind of what it is. Walk us through that, and then we'll go to the engine after that.
Sure. Well, I think we were chatting about kind of communication and messaging among many other things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think a bit like a technology-driven startup company, Innosphere's got a bit of a complicated story, message,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a confused brand. I mean,
Yeah.
we certainly haven't figured all this out ourselves,
Right.
to say the least.
Join the club.
Uh,
Right.
yeah, exactly. And it was interesting. I just spoke with an entrepreneur literally about an hour ago and was having this conversation with him. He said, "What do you guys do?"
Okay.
And so what had happened, which is probably somewhat typical of a lot of organizations, um, outside in, you don't know about a business or in our case, a nonprofit. Well, we have three different websites because we have pretty distinctly different things,
Yep.
from a mission perspective we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're kind of working to integrate some of this, so it's a little less confusing.
Right.
Um, but it's very interesting. The core organization, Innosphere, is a 501c3,
Mm-hmm.
and we're 27 years old. And so I've been part of the organization quite a while now,
Yep.
board and on staff. And over the years, as we've evolved and thought about, kind of go back to this constant question of the impact.
Mm-hmm.
As we thought about how do we create more impact? Well, the easy thing in the early days was more programming so we could support more companies because we were kind
Okay.
of rate limited. Hey, we're, typical
Sure.
nonprofit, right? Um, and so we were pretty successful there, getting new sponsorship, creating new revenue streams. So that was kind of step one. Step two was we saw an opportunity in Fort Collins, Colorado, in particular, because the city government's been so supportive of Innosphere really from the beginning. They're one of our founders, and they had some financial tools through an urban renewal authority area.
Right.
We built real estate, so we have
Mm-hmm.
about 50 companies that we house now,
Wow.
roughly between two
Awesome.
buildings, and In particular, what really excites us is specialized facilities like wet lab space for biotech
Yep.
companies. And
I
that's
remember.
really kind of
Yeah.
hard to get.
Yeah. So
Um,
great.
Next evolution was we're working on all these great companies. Now we're housing some of them, um, attracting early capital,
Yep.
not off the coast is challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tackled the capital question and we got into VC.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been in venture capital now, 2 regional funds and then 2 international funds.
How long ago did that start? Because I remember when it was Innosphere and now it's Innosphere Ventures. So what is the
Yeah,
change? How long ago was that?
that was 2017. We launched the first fund, and then
Okay.
second fund was 2022.
Okay. Great.
And so that kind of, again, another evolution of the organization. And then the most recent, and so we can talk about this,
Yeah.
The post-COVID strategy of the United States has been to help regions that are largely non-coastal, that are up and coming regions that could provide much better technology related economic development for the region and the country.
Yeah.
So there's been pretty specific funding to kind of lift different
Yep.
parts of the country up in 2 major programs. So we're funded by one, which is called the National Science Foundation Regional Innovation Engine.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a second major funding from the Economic Development Administration, what's called Build to Scale.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for life sciences, kind of these 2 big projects. So if you think
Right.
about, again, impact scale, we're
Yes. Yes.
deploying now some pretty significant
Mm-hmm.
federal funding to do that work.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like you went from, 1+1 is 2, where we have like, we need more programs for more people to grow more. And then it became this kind of exponential pathway after that with regard to impact and how can we go upward and forward at the same time and succeed with our systems and our growth. And yeah, that's a great kind of breadcrumbs trail that you just spelled out there. Mike, let's talk briefly. I didn't put this on our question sheet, but when you and I did a little bit of work together last year or year before, you gave me Rise of the Rest. Is that the name of the book that
Yep.
you gave me? Yeah. And I remember reading through that and learning a lot about this concept or reality that, if you're a non-coastal region, not Silicon Valley, not New York, New England, you've got extra challenges when it comes to raising capital, but there is this really beautiful fire burning, if you will, in the Colorado area because of, I want to say it's like 37 labs and universities, or you can correct my number there, but talk to our viewers and listeners, explain a little bit about what you grabbed from that book. Is it Rise of the Rest? Do I have the name right?
Yeah, and that's so Steve Case, who founded
Yes.
America Online. AOL.
Yes,
Yeah,
right. So tell us about that and how you see Colorado is so special.
Yeah, maybe just real quick on this idea that Steve and others are really passionately advancing, I'll say. I'd say for me personally, a really pivotal point in time was early 2019, and the Brookings Institute, similarly to Steve Case, was writing extensively about where is innovation and economic development in the United States happening. And what they concluded is that it's occurring in 8 metropolitan areas, which you kind of know all those, Boston, New York, Silicon Valley, right?
Atlanta, right?
And that their conclusion from studying this very intensely for a long period of time was, or is at the time, that the die is cast in the U.S. And without really serious intervention, emerging areas like Denver, Orlando, San Diego, kind of these second tier, and I don't mean that in a negative perspective, but kind of second tier tech ecosystem regions, we're not going to break out.
Right.
And that this was highly influential work that the Economic Development Administration and the National Science Foundation ultimately relied on to say, hey, let's think about post-COVID stimulus, get the company back on track economically, but really with an eye towards global competitiveness.
Right.
Let's try to fund regions that can advance. And that's how Innosphere led on behalf of its partners, the states of Colorado, Wyoming, the research universities, private companies. These are, this is a big collaboration.
Right. Right.
we proposed to the National Science Foundation regional innovation engines
Mm-hmm.
because Colorado, frankly, had been identified and legitimately is a breakout region,
Mm-hmm.
but it
Right.
just, it needs more of a boost. And
Mm-hmm.
then we were very excited to partner with the state of Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
They similarly are really trying to transition from a historically extractive industry economy to something in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so we latched onto this idea that between the two states, there was a lot of power in that
Yes. Yes.
regionally, and that we could really advance science and technology around climate resiliency as a core theme. And that's
Right.
what we subsequently have done.
That I love that. It's a great storyline, frankly, of how innovation can really come up in areas where it's not maybe you know being observed as much as the coasts, and that's always been an issue with regard to the coasts getting so much of the funding from a national perspective and elsewhere. But that's where a lot of the innovators go. And I was on the call with Alan Patrikoff, and I read his book around VC, and even in the old days of VC, that's just where people went to plant, and it sort of
Mhm.
stuck, right? And so
Yep.
now it's time to grow these other, as you said, second tier regions and states. And I'm seeing a lot of that in some of my conversations as well with some of the universities, Texas Tech University, University of Georgia. There's some really rich innovation programming that's happening all across the country. And Denver and our surrounding region is no exception. And Wyoming is an interesting connector. Mike, can you speak a little more about what Wyoming brings to the table for the engine itself in terms
Mhm.
of, I believe it's the university, correct? That's one
Yeah.
of the arms up there.
Yeah, so these big collaborative projects really are multi-partners. So it starts with the state of Wyoming, Wyoming Business Council, the
Mm-hmm.
University of Wyoming, and others.
Mm-hmm.
But those are kind of the key, I'd say, stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
What really bound us together is in the last, let's say, 15 years in particular, um, we're just seeing a lot more community risk around drought and wildfire in particular.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And we're seeing wildfire seasons starting earlier, larger wildfires. There's a variety of reasons for these things,
Right.
but that ripples through really a lot of what might feel like seemingly unrelated things.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, it's increasingly difficult to get insurance for commercial and residential property in what's known as the interface, basically
Mm-hmm.
between more urban. I mean, that's a relative term.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, both states have huge rural areas,
Right.
but basically, think about property that's near, national forest, BLM
Mm-hmm.
land, whatever happens to be.
Right.
Um, and so, why is that? Well, it's because the fire risk has gone exponentially up,
Yep.
and insurance companies and what are called reinsurers that sort of backstop that risk and the liability are increasingly not interested in funding. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're seeing this in Southern California with the recent wildfires,
Sure.
and the bellwether case is Florida for hurricanes,
Right.
where um, pretty much in the state you have one choice for flood insurance, which is so publicly backed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you pull that through and say, okay, in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, what's happening in the Western United States where we're having increasing wildfire and water
Mm-hmm.
availability questions, that's what we're trying to tackle through this climate resiliency program. And the outcome we're really seeking is for communities to become more resilient. And
Okay.
there's a variety of ways they can do that. And there's a bunch of technology we think will drive resiliency, uh, advanced data analytics,
Right.
prediction,
Yep.
weather modeling,
Right.
water modeling, and then really ultimately that trick gets translated into the commercial world. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not the city government delivering that, it's the
Sure.
private sector. And
Right.
then all of that boosts, the resiliency of the region.
Right. It's got a scalable impact for sure.
And then we
And
translate
so,
that to other parts of the world.
yeah. Oh, it's
Yeah.
amazing. And it's a
Yeah.
lifelong venture that you're on for sure. And I know I know you're so passionate about doing this work, which makes you get up every morning and see what's going to happen in the day ahead. I can imagine that the startup founders that you're attracting and looking for, the entrepreneurs who bring these solutions, are obviously setting out to solve these problems when it comes to, you know, water and
Hmm.
fire resistance, and the life sciences piece is more of the is that more of the Innosphere arm of things, is that correct,
Yeah.
Mike? Okay, so
But
the
there's
climate
quite an overlap of
yeah,
climate risk,
right,
if you will, and health and human health.
right,
I mean, for
right.
example, in many parts of the world, just urban heat is a much more significant issue than meets the eye. I mean,
Hmm.
look at places like Arizona, South Texas that are seeing more days of fill in the blank temperature and above on a
Hmm.
consistent basis. This has massive implications for how we work,
Hmm.
especially outside of agriculture, municipal workers,
Right.
construction, and then unhoused. I mean,
Yep.
it
Right.
cuts across. It doesn't matter who you are. This
Right.
impacts you.
And you're
And so things like heat, even in Denver. Well, so even I mean, say even in Denver, this is
right.
an
Right.
increasingly big issue. Is
Yes,
our
yes,
urban heat?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So these are all the types of impacts you see
Yep.
from a changing environment. And that's what we're
Right.
really trying to understand is what are these key issues between the two states? Where do we align
Hmm.
around a
Hmm.
solution set? And then how
Hmm.
do we bring technologies to market that
Hmm.
ultimately improve resiliency?
Right. That's amazing. And I know job creation is a big part of the work that you've set out to do, and
Yeah.
that's something you're really proud of. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So maybe I'll kind of cover that in two parts.
Sure.
One is the Innosphere kind of overall works with companies in a variety of technology areas, climate, clean tech, life
Hmm.
sciences, smart cities, whole variety of areas. Um, I think the companies we were able to support in 2024 had a really significant year, about
Hmm.
600 jobs.
Hmm.
Just to put in perspective, if you were thinking about it from a state government perspective, and
Hmm.
you could recruit a single company with 600 equivalent jobs that are highly paid,
Hmm.
that's and we do this every year,
Wow.
or more.
Yeah.
This is the impact we're really trying
That's
to,
just
kind of get at.
right.
Now, with the National Science Foundation funded project, we have much bigger aspirations. So
Okay.
we're thinking about 18,000 jobs created in 10
Yeah.
years,
Amazing.
um, and about a $3 billion GDP boost to the
Wow.
region. And we think the companies over a decade will probably attract about $2 billion in capital. So
Gosh.
these are pretty big numbers
Yes, they
that
are.
we're
Yeah.
expecting, and
Yeah.
we're 1 year into it, so we're
Yeah.
kind of tracking
Yeah.
towards that, but a long way to go still for
Yeah,
sure.
well, like it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? But what an amazing impact that that can come as you continue this path and this vision. It's a really exciting experience for you and the whole team to be creating that type of impact from the environment perspective, of course, but the jobs and the lives that are being changed as well. So, okay, Mike, question for you around the NSF process of becoming one of those engines. We talked earlier in the show about it was really hard to get that cable initiative passed with the stakeholders.
Mhm.
Was it any easier to do the NSF grant and to get that kind of off the ground? And before you answer, I'll kind of just share with our audience this lights system that we talk about on the show, the red light and the green light. So, Mike and I have, well, Mike knows the model. It's the how-to model, and what we posit on the show is that whenever you are presenting to an audience, that audience of stakeholders is hovering around that red light of risk initially at some level when it comes to accepting the proposed idea that you're bringing in. So it is the speaker's job to do the very best job that they can to craft a message that gets those audience members out of the red light of risk through yellow and to the green light of go by the time you're finished presenting the idea. And in some cases, it might be a grant that you're writing, or it might be a formal presentation with slides. But the how-to model stands for the little cartoon bubbles that are in the audience's heads. As they look at the speaker, they're asking the speaker to hook me, get my attention. O is orient me, tell me what problem we're trying to solve. Win me is the W in the how-to model. Win me over about your solution and tell me what it is. The T is tell me more detail, data. That's the majority of your presentation, right? And then the O at the end is the offer me section where we're presenting the ask, like, please adopt this proposition. So just a refresh, but tell us, Mike, about the process, and was it easier? Was it not? Was it just totally different?
Totally different and much harder.
Yes. Well, tell us a little
I'll take
about.
building a telecom network any day now that
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, tell us about when you went into this, kind of expose for us some of the red lights of risk that you knew were in front of you when it came to this process of persuading the engine to accept you.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of really specific risk factors, let's call them. The first and most important one was this is the National Science Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very, very serious, very technical, very prestigious organization that by and large is and has been the domain of the research universities across the country.
Yep.
And to a lesser extent, federal labs that are funded by the National Science Foundation. So let's start there. Innosphere had zero experience with NSF, except that many, many companies we support get their money.
Okay.
And what do we know about NSF? They're very rigorous, very smart, very strategic, all the things, that you would imagine in the U.S. National Science Foundation. I think question one was, did we have the credibility on behalf of the partners to frankly even lead a project of this magnitude?
Boom.
And so the solution there was really let the partners without Innosphere involved determine ultimately if we're the right lead. Because the way I looked at it, which I think is still correct, is that there's a case and a desire from National Science Foundation for non-traditional, meaning not university, leads on engines. So they clearly wanted that to happen. But is Innosphere the right organization? Do we have the credibility with 2 state governments, multiple research universities, private companies to do this? It wasn't clear that we did. And so that was really the first big hurdle. And my personal approach was, instead of trying to convince people we were, is to let them have that conversation without us. And because if they said, hey, Innosphere, if you're not going to lead it, you're likely the startup partner in any event. So it's a huge role for us anyway, right?
Yeah. So
no downside from my view.
Okay. Mike, let me understand a little bit more. Did you kind of set out a few people to do kind of like the pre-diligence on this then? And how was like to do that research to say, like, are we the right lead? Can we actually win over this credibility? Was this like a little bit of just like intense research that you had some people do, or how did that actually operate?
Yeah, I would say it wasn't research per se, but who knows the most about National Science Foundation? The research universities in the 2 states.
Okay,
got it. Why don't we let you, who are the domain experts in NSF, without us at the table, Innosphere at the table, determine, because it could have just as logically been one of the universities that led. I mean, for sure. And
Sure.
so the conclusion was the vice presidents of research who drove that process
Hmm.
concluded that the National Science Foundation was serious, that
Hmm.
they wanted non-traditional leads,
Okay.
let's call it.
Okay,
And that
great.
too, because with the exception of the University of Wyoming, our resume is, less than 10 years,
Right.
which is a long time. We've been supporting the Colorado Research Universities for at
Oh,
least
yeah.
20 years, and in
Yes.
CSU's case, 27 years.
Right.
And so we had some standing and some recognition that, we're not an organization that's going anywhere. We're
Hmm.
not going to go out of business,
Hmm.
and that we would be the logical lead to really bring this complex partnership
Okay.
together.
So this was like you found a red light that you jumped over even before they knew you were even going to apply.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's
Exactly.
really interesting. And again, that's some savvy thinking ahead in terms of like really trying to put yourself in the shoes of your audience. And that's something that we teach leaders to do constantly. It's like get out of your own head, and you're displaying that so beautifully right here with this example, Mike. It was like, are they going to even listen to us? Are they even going to accept that we should be the lead, or who should it be? Who are they going to listen to the most when we finally do this application? So that's brilliant. I love that. And I didn't know that. So thanks for sharing that.
Yep.
Okay. Other risks before we kind of get into the application itself? What were the other red lights?
Well, I think so you have to clear hurdle one, obviously, to say it, is Innosphere even a logical contender?
Right.
Because,
Right.
this was a highly competitive process. There were
Hmm.
500 applications.
Gosh.
And so, we collectively, we had to go into this thinking we can win,
Right.
and we have the right coalition of partners and the right organization to put on point. So
Hmm.
once we came to that conclusion, hey, we think Innosphere would be logical to do this, the next risk factor was who leads it. And it
Hmm.
wasn't a foregone conclusion that I personally would lead it, although I run Innosphere.
Right.
And so, I think this is, getting back to where we started, Cindy, I've got a bit of an eclectic background, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Right.
I think I'll throw this out there. I'm pretty sure I'm the only city manager in America that does venture capital.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident that's true.
You are an N of
Um,
one,
yeah,
right?
N of one possibly. And so, that step was pretty straightforward because,
Hmm.
hey, let's have a nonprofit lead that has economic development experience in science and technology. Collect, check. Um, the research universities and the federal labs bring tremendous research
Yeah.
and development prowess. That's
Yep.
not what Innosphere does. Great. You
Right.
bolt that on,
Yes.
and then you say who leads the thing. And, I think, just this kind of unique background, public, private,
Hmm.
nonprofit,
Yeah.
really just is perfect for this role because
Yeah.
it's not any one thing that you
Hmm.
bring to the table in
Hmm.
your, in your professional experience that helps
Right.
you get ready to lead one of these projects.
Yeah.
I think I was kind of oddly qualified, I'd say, in this case,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
That's
be the
great.
lead.
Well, when you look at the playing field, if we use that analogy, it's just so cool. It's like the dream team came together from, each person and each entity brought a very unique skill set and level of expertise, whether that entity was the university or you personally or Innosphere or some of the partners you had tapped by that point, and the experience behind everyone. It just is a really great picture to look at as we all consider, who do I need on my team, whether it's a team of people or organizations, how are we going to foster the very best possible dream team to make our vision come to life. And so it seems like it obviously worked, and you clearly wrote in the application itself a very compelling narrative, I would imagine. Did you thread a little bit of storyline? I'm pretty sure that was part of it. How did you go about that piece, Mike?
Yeah, I think the story was pretty similar to what we talked about earlier, bringing the two states together
Yeah.
around, really risk around water,
Yep.
water availability, drought, wildfire. I mean, that's, coming off of
Yeah.
really serious wildfires in both states and across the
Yeah.
Western United States,
Sure.
that was a galvanizing factor.
Mm-hmm. An
Um,
impact. Mm-hmm.
And then the technology is a key part of it. This is the
Mm-hmm.
National Science Foundation, so
Right.
you have to show um, very, very high aptitude for research and
Mm-hmm.
development and the translation, meaning, yeah, hey, take stuff out of the lab to the
Mm-hmm.
market. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you look at this, this incredible organization that we built, it starts with the research and development capabilities of the partners,
Mm-hmm.
universities,
Right.
federal labs, and companies,
Mm-hmm.
and then sort of goes all the way through, hey, we can build this ecosystem, including the workforce of the future.
Yeah.
Because these are industries that are, these are new things.
Yes. Right.
And there's not job classifications, and
Mm-hmm.
there's not a way
Mm-hmm.
to really,
Gotta start it all from scratch.
absolutely, right.
Right. So, Mike, tell us about the moment, if there was one moment where you knew you had earned this and won it. And, how did you celebrate? How soon did you get to work after that point in time? Tell us about that moment where you realized you were in, you got it.
Well, this was such a competitive and rigorous process. I think we felt really good about our application.
Mm-hmm.
We think, well, we know we did extremely well in what NSF would call a site visit. So
Yes.
we brought a couple hundred people through the Innosphere building, which is not that big, by the way,
No, right.
over a couple of days to really demonstrate we had this two-state coalition that all the partners were in. We thought that went extremely well.
Yeah.
But it was, and this was, kind of a bittersweet part of the story. The chair of the Innosphere's board, John Leonard, who is such a champion for Innosphere for years and years and years, passed away in the
Yeah.
in the fall of 2023.
Yeah.
And the Innosphere team was actually at his service, and everybody's pretty bummed about
Sure.
losing John, and very
Sure.
unexpected.
Oh,
And we said, hey, why don't we just go to lunch and kind of process all this and just enjoy the time as a group. So virtually all the Innosphere team was at lunch, and literally when we sat down for lunch, we got the email from NSF that said we won.
no. Oh my gosh. I have chills. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Oh, that
Yeah,
is,
I really felt like John literally was with us in that
yeah.
moment. It
Yeah,
was pretty special.
that is so special.
Yeah.
Wow. What a moment for the team. Amazing. Well, that was fall of 2023. Take us to the present. What's been going on? How are things going? And then I'll ask a question about the partners and such as well. I want to understand kind of how they come in, but tell us what's been happening since you were awarded it, and, take us up to today.
Sure. So we officially went under contract on March 1st of 24.
Okay.
And so we're in a little bit of a strange kind of budget year because we're March to February. That's our budget year from NSF.
Okay.
So we knew in November we were going to win. We were totally embargoed,
Mm-hmm.
incredibly important to keep confidentiality. So luckily we did not let that out.
Didn't
But we
breathe a
started
word.
working on the
Okay.
project immediately,
Mm-hmm.
really in November.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had a huge head start. Once we could officially, be named right at the end of February.
Yep.
So what that looked like is, probably many of you out there running companies and got funding,
Mm-hmm.
or the company that got the funding.
Yeah. Right.
We had to scale up the staff. We had to build
Yeah.
literally the technical HR, all the infrastructure, reporting,
Mm-hmm.
compliance. I mean, that was not an insignificant part of the work.
No, not at all.
But most importantly, what I'm really, really proud of our team doing is moving really fast.
Yeah.
And taking the NSF funding we're getting and entrusted with, and really turning it into meaningful outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we really prioritized the use of National Science Foundation funding to back research teams and startups. So we did a grant program very, very quickly in the life of the engine. And then we're doing the second wave of funding right now. So, about 40% of all the funding that's coming to the engine over the first and second year is going back out into direct funding for teams and startups.
Yeah. Awesome.
another big chunk into workforce.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I think, that's how we're trying to measure success is how are we
Mhm.
taking the funding we're entrusted with to
Mhm.
produce an outcome. So
Mhm.
funding teams and achieving research goals,
Mhm.
funding startups, helping them
Mhm.
achieve milestones to
Yep.
commercialization. These are really important
Yep.
aspects of the work. And then big thing we're working on right now is we're creating the application for the third, fourth, and fifth year of funding, which is
Okay.
the next phase. So it's
Yep.
years 1 and 2 is one
Mhm.
phase, year 3, 4, 5 is the second
Mhm.
phase. And if you're fortunate enough to have done an outstanding job, you might get 10 years of funding.
Mhm.
So years 6 through 10 would be the last phase.
Yeah, you have to like go to tryouts again, right? It's like being on a sports team. You got to try out again and again and see how you're keep your muscle strength up
Yep.
and
And lots more
keep
professionals
showing
are
up.
entering the playing field, so it's not as
Yeah.
easy.
Yes. Well, Mike, what type of leader do you hope you're showcasing to your team, and what kind of culture are you trying to build with the engine team?
Yeah, I guess never easy questions, really.
Yep.
I guess the leadership style I'm trying to demonstrate is, we've been entrusted with a significant amount of taxpayer funding,
Yes.
from arguably the global leader in
Yeah.
funding science and technology, the National Science Foundation.
Right.
We have a giant X on our back in a
Yeah.
good way. We signed up for this,
Yeah.
but there's a tremendous responsibility
Mm.
to the
Mm-hmm.
government, to our states, to the
Mm-hmm.
universities to execute. This is
Mm-hmm.
no trivial matter,
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
step up and take responsibility for,
Yeah.
such a big opportunity. So
Yeah.
I think the leadership style I'm trying to demonstrate is, this is not like running Innosphere nonprofit where
Mm-hmm.
our stakeholders are a handful of great sponsors and
Mm-hmm.
20, 30 companies who might support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that responsibility is low,
No.
but
Right.
it's a whole order of magnitude difference. And
Yes.
so I think just reminding people this, this is a moment in time that probably we don't see again for
Mm-hmm.
decades.
Yeah.
And two, we fought really, really hard as
Yeah.
a coalition of partners to win, and now we got to go do it. I mean,
Yes.
it's not winning the project's not the outcome. It's
No, it's just
achieving.
the beginning.
It is, and it's
Yeah,
a bit exhausting. We're a
of
couple of
course.
years into what took a couple of years to win this thing, get it up
Yeah.
and running. And that's the life of a startup.
Yeah.
You're mission driven. You can't give up, and
Yeah.
you got to keep rallying the team around this.
Yeah.
You just can't take your foot off the gas.
Right. Right. And you have to build in a little bit of fun and relief so we don't have burnout coming through from the team, from yourself. What are some things you like to do, Mike, when you're not working that relieve your mindset and recharge you?
This is a funny question around the office, which is, I actually enjoy going home and reading research reports and constantly trying to figure out how to do this work better.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
and I'm not proud to say I might email people very late in the evening, like ideas so
That's so funny. Well, I have seen you
there you
walking
go.
around the neighborhood occasionally with your kids. So that's
No, I
good.
definitely love playing with, being with my family for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely, I'm not someone you emulate on.
Oh, that's funny.
How do you have more
Well,
balance in your life? Because balance to me is doing more work.
right. Oh gosh. Well, you
Someone was
have
kidding me and said,
that's a
Mike, you
big
must go on vacation and do more work than you do in the office. I'm like, probably. I don't know. It's just,
that's a big heavy X
yeah.
on your back. Well, you remind me of I worked with a scientist once who she lives in China, and she works in she's a research associate with DuPont, and she said the same kind of answer that you just said. I said, "What do you like to do for fun?" And she said, "Well, I like to read journal articles about chemical polymers and some of these things." And I was like, oh my gosh, wow. Well, hey, somebody needs to like
Yeah.
to do those kinds of things. So that's great. Mike, tell us a little about the partners who have come in and agreed to back this and be part of this party, if you will, and how they're helping you. What are they bringing to the table, and how are they going to advance the mission?
Yeah. And so the partners are somewhat diverse, meaning, I mean, there's categories that you would imagine in a big project like this. And maybe I'll just kind of run through the
Sure.
pillars of how, and by the way, every engine that's funded have the same pillars, so it's not unique to the Colorado Wyoming project.
Okay.
It starts with a research and development capability. And
Okay.
so again, you go right to the universities, the labs, and then larger companies are doing a lot of original research and development. That's the foundation of everything. It starts there. Are you, are you and can you develop novel technology? If you cannot, you don't get funded by NSF. So that is just foundational. And so the key stakeholders there are the vice presidents of research who sit on the engine board, and then what are known as the technology transfer offices.
Yep.
So these are the
CTOs.
staff that work with faculty to take a technology and license it.
Yep. Yep.
And then within the federal labs, it's a little bit different setup, but they have technology transfer and a variety of things. The second part of it, which is really Innosphere's core expertise, is how do you take technology to the market?
Yes.
And in most cases through a new organization or a startup. Then you layer on top of that, what's a key factor in being commercially successful? You got to sell.
Yep.
And who do lots of small companies sell to? Big companies. So we have a whole bunch of big companies like Microsoft and NVIDIA and Lockheed Martin and the Mars Corporation and, on and on and on. And so there's a layer of these, leading technology companies that are really critical for us to understand where's the market moving.
Yes.
Give some of these younger companies some technical insight into what you know.
Yep.
So that's a very important network. And then you have the state government, and there's myriad stakeholders here. Workforce. So state governments organize on behalf of their states. Workforce funding that goes to counties typically. Workforce is a big part of it. The community college systems within the states are critical partners. And then economic development. So state office economic development in Colorado, Wyoming Business Council, Wyoming, and then down to the local level, Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, chambers of commerce.
That's a lot.
And then there's a handful of nonprofit partners that are, trade associations and other orgs. But there's about 45, 50 partners in the engine.
Wow.
Overall. And so
a lot of bolts
big part
on
of
the engine.
Right. Kind of working with everybody.
Yeah. It's amazing. What a collaborative, amazing experience. Well, Mike, I know we're running out of time for our special edition today. I just have one more question for you, and then we'll just wrap this up. I like to ask leaders in your life, as you look back, is there a person that really helped you and pushed you toward a certain part of your career arc that you admire, or would shake their hand and thank them for something they did for you that maybe you didn't know then, but you kind of know now? This is one of the interesting trends as we get into our careers, looking back. Who was a person who kind of ushered you along in some way that you didn't maybe expect or even welcome maybe at that moment? Do you have anybody in mind?
Yeah, that's an easy one because, I was wrapping graduate school up and wasn't sure where. I didn't really want to work on the East Coast. So I grew up there and didn't have a network off the East Coast. So I was in Catch-22.
Yep.
And a gentleman I worked for while I was in DC in grad school introduced me to a gentleman named Jack Etheridge, who was the city manager of Thornton, Colorado at the time.
Okay.
And literally at a conference, he comes over to me and says, "Hey, my friend who I trust, deeply, said you're decent," or whatever he said. It wasn't very flattering, but like, "Who are you?"
Yes.
He said, "Well, my name is Jack, and I'm the city manager, and I'm looking to hire someone, and you were recommended." And I'm like, "Well, I'm at a trade show. I mean, I'm at the table, basically, talking some early internet products."
Yes.
And,
yes.
So I had a meeting with Jack later in the day. That was Saturday, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
I'll never forget this.
Oh
Sunday morning, Jack calls me and goes, he had a little bit of a rough voice, like, "Mike, this is Jack Etheridge." I said, "Hey, Jack, why are you calling me so early on Sunday morning?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, we kind of like you, and I'm going to offer you a job, but you have to tell me by Monday." And I'm like, who are you? And I'd never even been to Colorado. I was like,
You were
never,
kidding.
no.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I just was like, whatever,
That's
I'm doing this.
incredible. Oh
So
my gosh. A job offer on a Sunday morning. I mean, does it get any more sticky than that?
well, and the most important part of it is he really took me under his wing and taught me the business. And
Yeah.
I got into city management. I mean, this is not a vanity metric, but I wasn't 30.
Okay.
And that is highly unusual to be a city manager that young in your
Yeah.
career.
Okay.
And it was
Uh-huh.
because Jack trained me so well.
Oh,
And I
so great.
distinctly remember the mayor on my 30th birthday saying, Mike, I'm so glad you're not in your 20s anymore.
That's
Because I think it
great.
was sort of like the saying, like, hey,
Finally.
why do I have a 20-year-old in this top job? And
Oh, I love
no
it.
way I could ever even come close to that without, Jack really taking me under his wing and believing in
Yeah.
me. So
Oh,
easy,
so great. So
easy,
great. Yeah,
easy one
easy
to answer.
answer. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I love that. Well, it's just amazing how one introduction can change your life. So those of you out there, I mean, this happens all the time, and I marvel and I love thinking about all the strange breadcrumbs that seem strange, but really were just perfect for wherever we needed to go
Yeah.
next. So, Mike, I know you're easy to find, but is there any specific way you'd ask people to reach out to learn more about either Innosphere or the engine?
Well, by far the easiest way, we're quite active on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Innosphere has a LinkedIn page, and then I post quite a lot about what
Mm-hmm.
Innosphere and the engine are doing
Yeah.
myself personally. So I'd say that's
Yeah.
probably the best way to learn a bit more about what the organization's doing.
Awesome. And any quick words of advice for any early stage, mid stage entrepreneurs who are feeling low or frustrated right now about their innovation?
Part of the process.
Yeah.
Get
Keep
over it.
going. Yeah.
Yep.
Keep going
Keep
one step
going.
at a
Yeah,
time.
you can have a low moment, but bounce back
Yeah,
fast.
absolutely.
Get
Right.
help.
Well,
That's
fantastic.
what we all do.
Yep. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today on Red Light, Green Light. It's been such a pleasure to dive into some of the wormholes of your journey and all the areas that you're growing right now. You're such a beacon in the community, and it's been such a pleasure to get to know you and how you work and operate with your team.
Fantastic. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you, Mike. And everyone listening and watching, thank you for listening and watching. In the meantime, as we wrap this episode, I'd love for everyone to go out and see who in your stakeholder audiences you can try to bring from the red light of risk to the green light of go before our next episode drops. Take care and thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.